I am Vex Hari, Senior Security Coordinator for Galactic Coalition Outpost 9, orbital station above the planet, designated EC7, third rock from a medium yellow star at the edge of the explored frontier. 6 months ago, the Galactic Coalition made formal contact with the dominant species of EC7. The humans, they called themselves. We had watched them from a safe distance for 2 decades before the Council voted to introduce contact protocols. We had read every sensor scan, every atmospheric sample, every intercepted broadcast. We thought we understood them. We were wrong. We were so completely, catastrophically wrong that I will spend the rest of my career writing reports about exactly how wrong we were. But let me start at the beginning, because that is where the disaster started. My junior officer, a young coordinator named Brell, had filed the report at 0312. I had been asleep. I read it upon waking, standing in my quarters in the dim blue light of the station, and I read it 3 times before the words made sense to my brain. Brell had written, in his neat and careful handwriting, the following: 12 human subadults, ages estimated between 7 and 12 solar cycles, were apprehended at the perimeter boundary of Survey Station 4 at approximately 2100 local planetary time. The subadults had bypassed 3 perimeter sensors and 1 retractable barrier. Method of bypass unknown. Subadults are currently secured in Holding Room C. They appear to be in good health. No threat has been assessed. Containment is standard. I read the word subadults 4 times. Then I read 12. Then I read ages 7 to 12. I sat down on the edge of my sleeping platform and stared at the wall for a full minute, because some part of my brain, the part that had studied human behavioral files for the past 6 months, was already sending alarm signals that I did not yet know how to name. I pulled up the live feed from Holding Room C. What I saw was not what I expected. I had been inside Holding Room C many times. It was a clean, well-lit, temperature-controlled space, approximately 8 meters by 10, with smooth walls, a water dispensing unit, and a row of basic seating along the far wall. We used it for processing unexpected arrivals and the occasional diplomatic miscommunication. It was, by any measure, a perfectly ordinary room. Right now, it looked like the inside of a human market event. 3 of the 12 children had pushed the seating into a rough circle in the center of the room and were sitting cross-legged inside it, apparently engaged in some kind of structured conversation. One of them, a girl with a long braid of dark hair, was writing in a small paper book with a short yellow stick. 2 boys near the water unit were attempting to reconstruct the dispensing mechanism by pressing every available surface repeatedly and comparing notes in loud whispers. One small child, the youngest by appearance, had fallen completely asleep in the corner, with her head resting on what looked like a folded piece of outer clothing. And then there was the child standing at the observation window. She was perhaps 10 years old, with short reddish hair and large pale eyes, and she was standing directly in front of the 2-way observation glass with her arms crossed, staring at the exact point where my face would have been if I had been standing on the other side. She could not see through the glass. That was the point of 2-way observation glass. But she was staring at it like she knew I was there, like she was waiting. I felt something I had not expected to feel while watching a group of small humans in a holding room. I felt watched. I closed the feed and called Brell immediately. He answered on the second ring, looking cheerful. Brell was young, only 2 years out of the academy, and he had the sort of confident ease that comes from not yet having made any serious mistakes. He would lose that ease before morning. I was sorry about that, in the way you are sorry about things that are necessary. "Good morning, sir," he said. I was about to file the supplemental. "Brell," I said, "tell me exactly what happened. From the start. Leave nothing out." He straightened slightly, the way officers do when they realize a casual report has become something else. Survey 4's perimeter alarm triggered at 20:47 local time. Ground team responded within 4 minutes. they found the 12 subadults approximately 30 meters inside the boundary. The subadults had removed a lower panel from Sensor Tower 6, apparently using a small metal tool, and crawled underneath the barrier wire. They removed a panel from Sensor Tower 6, I repeated. Yes, sir. The panel requires a specific counter-rotation to open. The subadults appear to have figured this out by, according to my ground team's account, just trying things until something worked. I closed my eyes briefly. How long were they inside the boundary before detection? Brell checked something off screen. Approximately 40 minutes, sir. 40 minutes. Yes, sir. Ground team noted that the subadults had moved quite far into the survey area during that time. They had reached the equipment storage annex. Some of the equipment had been examined. Examined. Moved. In some cases. One device had been partially disassembled. It was a soil sampling unit. It had been put back together again, mostly correctly. I spent a moment processing this information. Brell, what was your reasoning for placing them in holding room C rather than immediately contacting human liaison and returning them to the surface? Brell looked slightly less cheerful now. It was late, sir. The liaison office doesn't have an emergency line established yet. And my assessment was that the subadults were not a priority threat. They're children, 12 of them. I thought it would be simpler to hold them overnight and process the paperwork in the morning. You thought, I said slowly, that it would be simpler. Yes, sir. I looked at the live feed again. The girl with the reddish hair was still standing at the observation window. She had not moved. She was still staring at exactly the right spot. Brell, I said, I need you to pull the human behavioral files, specifically the section on parental response to offspring threat. Read it completely, then I need you to meet me at holding room C in 20 minutes. There was a pause. Is something wrong, sir? I'm not certain yet, I said, but I want you to read those files before we speak again. I ended the call and stood up. I was already dressed. I had not taken off my uniform before sleeping, which in hindsight was either excellent luck or some deeper instinct I did not know I had. I walked to my desk and pulled up the human behavioral files myself, going directly to the section I had not looked at in 3 weeks, because it had seemed, at the time, like an edge case. A theoretical concern. The section was titled Human Parental Bonding, Threat Response Protocols. I began reading. By the time I reached the 4th paragraph, I was standing up. By the 6th paragraph, I had sent an emergency message to Commander Krethos. The message said only, Sir, we have a situation. Holding room C. Come immediately. Do not delay. I sent it, put my communicator in my pocket, and walked out of my quarters at something close to a run. The corridor was quiet. The station ran on a skeleton crew overnight, and most of my colleagues were asleep in their quarters, unaware that the most serious diplomatic incident in the history of our outpost was currently sitting cross-legged in a circle in holding room C, writing notes in a small paper book. I had read, in the human behavioral files, a sentence that kept repeating in my mind as I walked. The sentence was this: human adults who perceive a direct threat to their offspring have been observed to display a complete suspension of personal survival instinct. This response is neurochemical, involuntary, and near universal across the species. It cannot be negotiated with, reasoned against, or predicted in its duration or intensity. It is, in the assessment of coalition behavioral analysts, one of the most dangerous naturally occurring responses documented in any species on record. One of the most dangerous naturally occurring responses on record. And somewhere below me, on the surface of EC7, 12 sets of human parents had just noticed that their children were missing. I reached holding room C at 0401. Brell was already there, standing outside the door, holding a data pad with both hands, and looking like a man who had just read something he deeply wished he had not. His face, when he looked up at me, told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly he now understood the situation. "Sir," he said. "Yes," I said. The files say, I know what they say. We stood together for a moment in the corridor, looking at the closed door of holding room C. From inside, faintly, we could hear voices. The children were awake and talking. Someone laughed. It was a bright, uncomplicated sound, and it sat in the middle of my chest like a stone. I checked my communicator. Commander Krethos had not yet responded. I looked at the door again. I thought about the words, suspension of personal survival instinct. And then I pressed the button on the door panel that activated the intercom, and I said, carefully and clearly, in the human language that I had spent 4 months learning, is everyone in there all right? The talking stopped. Then the girl with the reddish hair, whom I could see on the small monitor beside the door, walked directly to the speaker panel on her side of the room and said, in a voice that was completely calm and entirely too composed for a 10-year-old in a detention facility on an alien space station, "We're fine. We have questions, though. A lot of them. Who are you?" I looked at Brel. Brel looked at me. Neither of us had an answer that felt adequate. My communicator buzzed. Commander Krethos had replied. The message was 4 words long. It said, I am already coming. The first thing I did when I reached my research station that morning was make tea. This is not a detail worth noting, except that I did not drink it. It sat on the edge of my desk and went cold while I read the incident report for the second time, and then watched the holding room C footage, and then sat very still for approximately 45 seconds, which for me is a very long time to sit still. My name is Dr. Una Sell. I am a xenobiologist with 22 years of field and research experience, and for the past 14 months I have been the Coalition's primary analyst on human behavioral patterns. I wrote the first contact manual. I designed the initial liaison protocols. I spent 8 months preparing documents with titles like Recommended Interaction Guidelines for EC7 Inhabitants and Human Social Behavior, a Preliminary Framework. I want to be clear about something. I knew humans well. I knew them better than almost anyone in the Coalition at that point. I had watched hundreds of hours of their transmissions. I had studied their language, their music, their arguments, their celebrations, the way they behaved when they were tired, and the way they behaved when they were happy, and the way they behaved when someone they loved was hurt. I knew, in the clinical and documented sense, exactly what happened when a human adult believed their child was in danger. Knowing it and seeing it begin to happen are 2 completely different things. The emergency summons from Vexhari had come in at 03:58. I had been awake already, as I usually am at that hour, working on a comparative analysis of human greeting behaviors. When I read the alert, I stood up from my chair so quickly that I knocked over my reference stack and did not stop to pick it up. 12 human children, ages 7 to 12, currently in Coalition custody. I pulled up my own copy of the behavioral files before I even put on my field coat, not because I had forgotten what they said, but because I needed to see the words in front of me, fixed and real, to make myself understand the full weight of what was now happening. The section on parental response was 37 pages long. I had written most of it myself. I had written phrases like extreme protective response and near total suppression of self-preservation, and documented cases of solo humans confronting groups of significantly larger predators when offspring were at risk, with outcome data suggesting success rates higher than initial physical assessment would predict. I had written those words. I had researched them thoroughly. I had felt, while writing them, the professional satisfaction of careful documentation. I had not, at the time, fully felt what those words meant. I felt it now. I pulled up the live feed from holding room C. This is what I saw. The 12 children had, in the hours since their containment, organized themselves into what I can only describe as a functional social unit. There was a clear leader, the girl with the reddish hair, who I would later learn was named Clara. She had positioned herself closest to the room's main communication panel and had spent a significant portion of the night writing in what appeared to be a personal journal. Around her, the other children had distributed themselves by task and temperament in a way that looked casual, but was, on closer examination, quite deliberate. Two older boys near the water dispenser were working on what looked like a schematic drawn in the condensation on the wall. They were talking in low, focused voices and occasionally gesturing at specific points in their drawing. They had been studying the room's infrastructure. Three girls near the back of the room were playing a quiet game involving hand gestures and counting, and while this looked like simple play, I noticed that one of them was periodically looking up at the ceiling vents, the corner sensors, and the door panel, and returning to the game with a small expression that was not quite a smile and not quite a decision. She was 9 years old, and she was mapping the room. A boy of about 11 had approached one of the two coalition security officers posted inside the room and was engaged in what appeared to be a conversation. The officer, a large and generally impassive individual named Voth, was listening with an expression I had never seen on his face before. The boy was asking him questions, and Voth was, against every protocol in his training, answering them. I watched this for 30 seconds. Then I picked up my communicator and called Vexhari directly. "I have the feed," I said when he answered. "Then you understand the situation," he said. "Yes," I said. "How long have they been on station?" 7 hours, 40 minutes. "And no contact was made with the surface?" A pause. "No, my junior officer made the containment decision independently. He assessed them as non-threatening." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Vexhari, they are non-threatening. That is not the problem. The problem is their parents." "I know," he said. "The parents will have noticed by now. A missing human child triggers immediate community response. 12 missing children at once." "I know," he said again, quieter this time. "How long until Krethos arrives?" "He says 20 minutes. He was at the outer observation deck when I reached him." "All right. I am coming to the station. Do not attempt to communicate with the children without me present. Do not increase security posture in the holding room. Do not make any changes at all." I picked up my field coat and moved toward the door. "And Vexhari, make sure the communications array is fully operational. Both directions." "Both directions?" he repeated. "We are going to need to receive transmissions from the surface very soon," I said. "And we are going to want to be ready to respond to them immediately. Every second of delay will matter." I ended the call and walked quickly through the corridor of my research station. My tea was still on my desk, stone cold. I did not go back for it. The transit shuttle to Outpost 9 took 14 minutes. I spent 12 of those minutes reviewing every data point I had on human parental response, not because any of it had changed, but because I was trying to build, in my mind, a complete and honest picture of what the next several hours were going to look like. Here is what I knew. Humans bond with their offspring in a manner that is, by the standards of most documented species, extreme. This is partly evolutionary. Humans are born in a state of profound helplessness and remain dependent for an unusually long time. This has produced, over tens of thousands of years, a caregiving instinct of remarkable intensity. Human adults do not simply feel affection for their children. They experience their children as something close to an extension of their own identity. A threat to the child is processed at a neurochemical level as a threat to the self. But it goes beyond that. And this is the part that I had written carefully in my files and which I now needed Vexhari and Krethos and everyone else on that station to understand completely. Humans also extend this protective response outward, not just to their own children. A human adult who is not a parent will still respond to a threatened child with a version of the same instinct. The maternal and paternal response in humans is not strictly biological, it is social. Communal. When human children are in danger, the response is not limited to the people who produce them. It spreads. 12 children missing from a community would produce a response not just from 12 sets of parents. It would produce a response from the entire surrounding network of adults, because humans have developed, across their history, a collective understanding that the protection of children is everyone's responsibility. I had written a footnote in the behavioral files that said, "This distributed protective instinct may represent one of the most efficient social defense mechanisms documented in any species. A single threatened human child effectively activates an entire community's emergency response. This should be considered a primary factor in any scenario involving human offspring." I had written that footnote 8 months ago. I was now living inside it. The shuttle docked at Outpost 9 at 0441. I went directly to the monitoring station adjacent to Holding Room C, where Vex Hari was waiting with Brel and 2 other officers who all had the look of people standing near something they could not move away from fast enough. I looked at the room feed first. Clara, the girl with the reddish hair, was still standing near the communication panel. She had a folded piece of paper in one hand. She appeared to be waiting. "Has she been standing there long?" I asked. "About 2 hours, Vex Hari said. "She knows someone will come," I said. "She is preparing." I looked at Vex Hari. "What is in the paper?" "We don't know." "She wrote it herself?" "Yes, about an hour after they arrived. Spent approximately 20 minutes on it." I studied the girl on the feed. She was small and calm and entirely unbothered by her surroundings, and she was holding that folded paper with the quiet confidence of someone who had a plan. A 10-year-old human child, alone on an alien space station, had made a plan. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the monitoring console and let out a long, slow breath. "Vex Hari," I said, "the surface communications array. What is it showing?" He pulled up a secondary screen. The communication frequency assigned to the human surface liaison had, in the past 40 minutes, received 41 attempted contact signals. 41 in 40 minutes. And then, as I watched the screen, the signal changed. It was no longer a contact attempt, it was a direct transmission, structured, organized, clearly prepared in advance. Someone on the surface had stopped asking to be connected and had decided to simply broadcast. The voice that came through the station speakers was a woman's voice, measured and unhurried in the way that voices are unhurried when the person speaking them has moved past panic into something much quieter and much more focused. She said, "This is Coordinator Patricia Hallam, EC7 Ground Liaison. We are aware that 12 children from the Northfield community are currently on your station. We would like to speak with whoever is in charge. We are not filing a formal complaint at this time. We are asking for information, and we are asking calmly. We will wait for your response. We want to be cooperative, but we need you to understand something. Those are our children, and we will hear from them or about them within the next 30 minutes. That is not a request." The transmission ended. The monitoring room was very quiet. Brel said, in a small voice, "She said at this time." "Yes," I said. "Regarding the formal complaint." "Yes." Brel sat down slowly in his chair. I turned to Vex Hari. "Open a response channel." "Right now, we are going to respond within 5 minutes." I looked at the feed, where Clara was still standing, still waiting, still holding her folded paper. "And then, I need to speak with those children directly, starting with that one." Vex Hari followed my gaze to the screen. "Why her first?" "Because," I said, "she has been waiting 2 hours to talk to us. She already has a document prepared, and she is going to speak with someone, whether we give her the opportunity or not." I picked up the communication headset from the desk. I would rather it be me. Commander Krethos arrived 4 minutes later. He walked into the monitoring room, read the situation from the faces around him in approximately 3 seconds, looked at the transmission log showing 41 contact attempts, and said, very quietly, in his own language, "How long?" 7 hours 50 minutes since containment, Vex Hari said. Krethos looked at him with an expression that was not anger. It was something older than anger. It was the expression of someone watching a small and avoidable fire that has been burning unattended long enough to become something else entirely. "Get me the surface channel," he said. "I am speaking to them personally, right now." He sat down in the primary communications chair, adjusted the console, and looked at the screen showing holding room C one more time. 12 children, 7 to 12 years old, talking and drawing and playing games and standing patiently by communication panels with folded papers. "Get me the channel," he said again, and his voice was flat and controlled and very, very tired. I stood beside him because I knew what was coming and because I wanted to be there to manage it. Outside the station, the planet below us turned slowly in the dark, and on its surface, 41 families were not sleeping. They were making their own plans. The transmission from EC7 ground started at 0447 station time, and I want to be honest with you, I was not prepared for the voice. I had read everything in the behavioral files. I had watched the live footage. I had listened to Dr. Una Cell explain, in careful and clinical language, exactly what human parental response looked like and what it was capable of. I had read the words suspension of self-preservation instinct and near-universal species response, and I had understood them intellectually, the way you understand a description of deep water before you fall into it. And then Coordinator Patricia Hallam's voice came through the station speakers, and I understood something new. The file had described the response as dangerous. What the file had not said, because it was a scientific document and not a personal account, was that it was also very quiet. The voice that spoke to us was not raised. It was not trembling. It was controlled in the precise way that something is controlled when the alternative to control is something the speaker has consciously chosen not to allow. There was a stillness in it that was more unnerving than any amount of shouting would have been. Commander Krethos opened the response channel. He introduced himself by full title and rank, which is standard protocol, and he told Coordinator Hallam that the children were safe and unharmed. He said this first, before anything else, because Dr. Cell had told him to, and because Dr. Cell had been correct that it was the most important piece of information and should be delivered without delay. There was a 3-second silence after Krethos spoke. Then Coordinator Hallam said, "I would like to speak to one of them." Krethos looked at Dr. Cell. Dr. Cell nodded once. Krethos said, "We will arrange that." "Now, please," said Hallam. Krethos looked at Dr. Cell again. Dr. Cell was already moving toward the door of holding room C. I followed her, because I needed to understand everything that was about to happen, and because standing in the monitoring room watching felt suddenly insufficient. Dr. Cell stopped outside the door. She straightened her coat. She took a breath. Then she looked at me and said, in a low voice, "Let me do the talking at first, and whatever the children say to you, respond naturally. Do not be formal. They will not respond well to formal." "What do you mean by naturally?" I asked. She considered this for a moment. "Like yourself," she said, "but faster." Then she pressed the door panel, and we walked in. The room changed the moment the door opened. Not in a dramatic way, it was subtle. The children who had been talking went quiet, not from fear, but from attention. The ones who had been moving stopped, and every face turned toward the door with an expression that was not the expression of captives or frightened children. It was the expression of people who had been waiting for something to happen and were now prepared to engage with it. Clara was standing right where she had been on the monitor, 3 steps from the door. She was still holding the folded paper. She looked at Dr. Cell first, with the measuring look of someone assessing a new piece of information. Then she looked at me. "Are you the one who was watching us through the window?" she asked. I opened my mouth. Dr. Cell touched my arm briefly. "We were monitoring the room, yes," Dr. Cell said, "to make sure you were all right." "We're fine," Clara said, "but we have questions." "I know," Dr. Cell said. "I have some too. But first, I need to let you speak to someone from the surface. Your families are trying to reach you." Clara's expression did not change dramatically. But something in it shifted, and the shift was enough to tell me that despite everything, despite the composed and organized and apparently unbothered surface she had maintained for nearly 8 hours, she had been waiting for those words. "Okay," she said. Dr. Sell opened the portable communication unit she had brought from the monitoring room. She connected it to the ground channel. She handed it to Clara. What happened in the next 4 minutes I will not attempt to describe in full, because most of it was personal and none of it was mine. Clara spoke to a woman on the other end of the channel, and the woman was her mother, and the conversation was brief because Clara, to her considerable credit, kept it brief. She said she was fine. She said the others were fine. She said they were on the space station, and it was very interesting. She said she had been taking notes. Her mother, on the other end, said very little, but I could hear the breathing change in the channel. The measured control in Coordinator Hallam's voice had been one thing. The small, fractional sound of a mother hearing her child's voice after 8 hours of silence was something else entirely. When the call ended, Clara handed the communication unit back to Dr. Sell. She looked up at me. "Now," she said, "can I ask my questions?" And she held out the folded paper. I took it. I unfolded it. It was covered, front and back, in small, neat handwriting in blue ink. It was a list, numbered from 1 to 23, and it began with 1. What are your actual names, not your job titles? I read to number 7. Can we see the engine room? I read to number 14. How many species are in the coalition? Are all of them friendly? What defines friendly? I read to number 21. Does the station have a cafeteria? What is the food situation here? I looked up from the paper. Clara was watching me with those large, calm eyes. "You wrote this in the first hour," I said. "Hour and a half," she corrected. "I didn't have a lot of light at first. Marcus lent me his torch after about 30 minutes. I looked over at Marcus, who was 11 years old and was currently looking at me with an expression of composed interest. He gave a small nod, as though confirming the timeline. I looked back at the list. I thought about the behavioral files. I thought about the section on human children specifically, which I had read carefully, and which said things like high curiosity drive and reduced fear response compared to adults, and strong social orientation and rapid trust building with unfamiliar individuals. All of that was accurate, and all of it was, somehow, completely inadequate. The files did not say, a human child, placed in an unfamiliar and potentially frightening situation, will organize her companions, map the room, strike up a conversation with the guard, document her observations, and prepare a numbered list of questions within 90 minutes of arrival. The files did not say that. They should have. The alarm reached us at 0512. Not a station alarm, a sensor alert. My communicator vibrated twice, which was the signal for incoming approach, and then the monitoring station at the end of the corridor lit up with the pale amber glow that meant the external sensors had detected objects on an intercept course with the station. I excused myself from the holding room, which took a moment, because Clara had a follow-up to question 7 that she had not yet asked, and walked quickly to the monitoring room. Brell was at the sensor console, and his face had the expression of someone who had hoped, very sincerely, that this particular shift was almost over. "How many?" I asked. "Currently," he said slowly, 47. 47. "Yes, sir." "Coalition vessels?" He looked at me sideways. "No, sir." I looked at the sensor screen. 47 contacts. Moving on a direct course for Outpost 9, not fast by military standards but steady, and in a formation that was not technically a formation, but that had a certain purposeful organization to it anyway. "What kind of vessels?" I asked. Brell pressed 3 keys, and the sensor data translated into visual classification. He stared at the results. He pressed the keys again, as though hoping the output would change. It did not change. "They appear to be," he said, very carefully, "a mixed fleet. Commercial transport vessels, personal craft, several atmospheric to orbital shuttles that have been modified for extended flight." He paused. Two of the contact signatures matched the profile of ground-to-orbit cargo carriers. Another pause. And three of them match a profile that the database is classifying as repurposed ground transport vehicles. I stared at the screen. Repurposed ground transport, I repeated. Large wheeled vehicles. Yellow. Atmospheric drive modified for vacuum operation. The modifications appear to be recent. Commander Krethos appeared in the doorway. He had been in the communications room, still on the channel with the ground liaison. He took one look at the sensor screen and closed his eyes for a single second. Then he opened them and said, "Have we received a transmission from the fleet?" As though in answer, the communications panel lit up. Single channel, direct broadcast, no handshake protocol, no standard hailing procedure, just a voice. It was calm. It was unhurried. It was the kind of voice that does not need to be loud because it is already sure of itself. "This is the Northfield Community Cooperative. We are 47 vessels en route to Coalition Outpost 9. We do not have weapons. We are not here to fight. We want our children. We will arrive in approximately 90 minutes. We would like this to be peaceful, and we believe it can be. Please have our children ready. Thank you." The transmission ended. The monitoring room was very quiet. Brell said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "They said please." "Yes," Krethos said. "And thank you." "Yes. They modified school buses," Brell said, "to fly, in space." Krethos looked at the sensor screen for a long moment. Then he turned to me, and his expression was something I had not seen on his face in 12 years of working with him. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was a particular kind of recognition, the look of someone who has just understood something important and is taking a moment to fully absorb it. "Vexhari," he said. "Sir, those children need to be ready to go home when those ships arrive." "Yes, sir." "Not handed over. Ready. Comfortable. Aware that we are sorry this happened and that we mean it." He looked at the screen one more time. "No species that builds that kind of response for their children is a species we want to be on the wrong side of." "We're already on the wrong side," I said quietly. "We are currently on the wrong side," he said. "We have 90 minutes to move." I turned and walked back toward holding room C. Behind me, the sensors tracked 47 civilian ships, some of them yellow, crossing the dark between their planet and ours, carrying no weapons at all. They did not need weapons. They were already the most serious thing I had ever seen. I reached the door of holding room C and stopped for a moment with my hand on the panel. Inside, I could hear Clara's voice, explaining something to Dr. Sell. She sounded engaged and interested and entirely at ease. In 90 minutes, the ships would arrive. In 90 minutes, this would begin to end. But first, I had a door to open. I pressed the panel. I walked in. And I said, to the 12 children who looked up at me, "I owe all of you an apology. Can I start there?" Clara looked at me for a moment with that steady, assessing gaze. Then she said, "You can, but I still have questions 14 through 23. Somewhere behind me, I heard Brell, who had followed me down the corridor, make a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. It was the sound of someone who was still afraid, but had just realized that the situation was also, in some strange way, going to be all right. I pulled up a seat. 14 through 23, I said. "All right, let us begin." I have tried, since that night, to explain what it was like to be in that room. I do not think I have managed it yet, but I will try again now, because I think it matters that someone records it from where I was standing. My name is Clara. I am 10 years old, and I have been told by at least 4 adults in the past week that I handled a very difficult situation remarkably well. I appreciate that, but I want to be honest. At the time, it did not feel like a difficult situation. It felt like the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me, and I was not going to waste it by being scared. Let me go back to the beginning. It started because of the fence. The survey station had a fence around it. a metal fence with panels that slid sideways instead of swinging outward, which was different from normal fences and therefore immediately interesting. Owen noticed it first, because Owen notices anything mechanical within about 30 seconds of encountering it, and he pointed out to the group that the bottom of the fence had a gap underneath the third panel from the left. There were 12 of us, all from Northfield, all spending the first week of summer at the old camp by the ridge. The camp was about 2 kilometers from the survey station, which had appeared 6 weeks earlier and which none of the adults would let us go near, which meant we had been thinking about it constantly for 6 weeks. Owen also pointed out that Sensor Tower 6, which stood near the third panel from the left, had a cover plate on its lower section held closed by what appeared to be a simple counter-rotation latch. He had seen similar latches on equipment sheds at the camp. He spent about 8 minutes experimenting with it, and then it opened. I want to be clear that at no point did anyone have any intention of doing anything that felt wrong. We were curious. That is what we are. That is what people are, I think, when they are honest about it. We went in. The station was extraordinary. I cannot think of another word that fits. There were instruments I had never seen before, and materials that were not metals I recognized, and a storage area that smelled like nothing on Earth, not like nothing in the empty way, but like nothing in the way that means it came from somewhere else entirely. Owen and Henry spent the first 20 minutes with a soil sampling unit that had more moving parts than anything Owen had ever seen, which is saying something because Owen once spent a full afternoon with a lawnmower engine. I walked the perimeter of the main structure and counted doors, recorded what I could see through the transparent panels, and wrote down everything that seemed important. That is when the people arrived. I want to describe them accurately. The officers who came into the survey area were tall, not impossibly tall, but significantly taller than most adults I knew, with a physical structure that was different from humans in ways that were immediately obvious and very difficult to stop looking at. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were not the same, and the skin had a quality that was not like skin I had ever touched, and the eyes were positioned slightly wider apart than a human face would place them. They were, without any doubt, not human. I felt, in that first second, something that moved through me very quickly and was then replaced by something else. The first thing was a spike of something sharp and alert. The second thing was curiosity so strong it crowded out almost everything else. I thought, these are the people who built this station. I thought, I need to know everything about them. The officers moved efficiently and without any apparent hostility. They communicated in a language I did not understand, and they guided us, firmly but gently, away from the station and toward a small transport vessel. Some of the younger children were upset at this point. Lily, who was 7, started to cry, and I moved to sit next to her and told her what I genuinely believed, that these were not dangerous people, that they were scientific people, and that scientific people generally followed rules and did not hurt others without reason, and that we had not given them any reason. Lily stopped crying within a few minutes. I am not sure if this is because she found my reasoning convincing or because one of the officers gave her a small light that changed colors when you shook it. Either way, she stopped. The transport vessel took us to the station orbiting above. This was also extraordinary. I pressed my face against the viewing panel for the entire transit and watched the planet get smaller, which is something I had read about but had not understood until the moment I actually saw it happen. The curve of the Earth from space looked like something from a book, except real, except enormous, except impossibly beautiful. Henry had to remind me twice that I was supposed to be documenting, not just staring. He was right. I started writing. The holding room they put us in was clean and well lit, and not uncomfortable. There was a water unit and seating, and the temperature was maintained at something close to normal. The 2 officers who stayed inside the room with us were large and quiet and extremely uncertain about what to do with 12 children, which I found immediately relatable because I have had the same experience with adults in some of my after-school programs. The larger of the 2 was named, I later learned, Voth. He was wearing an armored uniform and holding a long instrument that I decided early on was probably not a weapon because he kept adjusting how he held it in a way that did not suggest readiness to use it. He held it like someone carries something they have been told to carry and are not sure what to do with. I approached him first. He looked at me. I said, "Hello, I'm Clara. What's your name?" He said something in his language. I said, "I don't know what that means, but that's okay. We have time." Over the next 2 hours, Voth and I established, through a combination of gestures, expressions, a small translation device he eventually produced from a compartment in his uniform, and a significant amount of patience on both sides, that his name was Voth Ossel, but that Voth was acceptable, that he had been on the station for 3 years, that he had a family unit on his home planet, that when I asked him to demonstrate the clapping game that Lily and the other younger children were playing, he watched it 3 times with focused attention and then, on the 4th demonstration, joined in. He was not good at it. His hands were the wrong shape for the specific pattern. But he tried, and the trying was what mattered. By hour 3, I had filled 14 pages of my notebook. I had documented everything I could see or learn about the room, the station, the officers, the air quality, the sound of the ventilation system, the light panels in the ceiling, and Voth's translation device. I had organized the other children by skill and interest, Owen and Henry on infrastructure, the 3 older girls on systematic observation, Marcus on timekeeping and orientation, and the younger children on well-being and morale, which meant Lily held the color-changing light and the others sat with her and played games. I had also written a list. The list came to me around hour 2, when I realized that eventually someone was going to come through that door, and when they did, I wanted to be ready. I had seen enough of the room and the officers to understand that we were not in serious danger, but I had also understood something else. These people had made a mistake by bringing us here, and when they realized it, they were going to need to fix it, and the fixing was going to involve conversation, and conversation was something I could do. I wrote 23 questions. I wrote them in order of priority, with the most important ones first. The most important question was what their names were, not their titles or their ranks or their designations, their actual names, because you cannot talk to someone properly until you know their name, and I wanted to talk to these people properly. Question number 7 was the engine room, because I genuinely wanted to see it, and I thought it was worth asking. I was standing by the communication panel when the door opened. I had been standing there for 2 hours. Dr. Una Sell came in first. She was smaller than the security officers, and she moved differently, with the quick, precise energy of someone who thinks fast and walks at the same speed as her thoughts. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and we both made the same small assessment in the same short moment. Then she told me my family was trying to reach me. I will not say much about the conversation with my mother, except that I kept it short on purpose, not because I did not want to talk to her, but because I knew that she would need to hear my voice and know I was fine, and after that, the best thing I could do for everyone was be calm and competent and keep things moving. My mother has always said that I handle emergencies by getting very still and very practical. I do not know if that is a compliment. It is accurate. After the call, I gave Vexhari my list. He read it. He looked at me. He looked at the list again. He seemed like a person who was experiencing several emotions at once and was not sure which one to have first. I gave him a moment. Then he said that I was right, that he owed us an apology, and he sat down across from me with the list in his hands and said we could work through questions 14 to 23 if I was ready. I was ready. I had been ready for 2 hours. We talked for a long time. Dr. Sell translated when needed, and sometimes Vexhari used a translation device, and sometimes I used simpler words so the device did not struggle. Owen joined the conversation after a while, because the infrastructure questions fell naturally in his direction, and then Marcus, because the timekeeping questions needed someone with a consistent sense of elapsed hours. Veth continued the clapping game with Lily and the others. He was getting better. Not good, but better. He had figured out the basic rhythm by the fourth round. At some point, someone mentioned that the ships had arrived. The news moved through the room. In that way news moves, when everyone hears it at the same time. The younger children looked up. Marcus said, "How many?" And when Vexhari said 47, Lily looked up from her color-changing light with her serious 7-year-old eyes and said, "That's a lot of mums and dads." "Yes," said Vexhari, and there was something in his voice that I recognized, though it took me a moment to name it. It was the sound of someone who has just fully understood the size of something. "Are you scared?" I asked him, because it seemed like the right question. He thought about this for a moment. He was honest with me, which I respected. "Yes," he said. "But not of what I expected to be scared of." "What do you mean?" He looked at me, and at the room, and at Volth doing the clapping game with Lily. "I expected," he said slowly, "that the dangerous part of humans would be the part that was most like us. The part that builds weapons and defends territory and responds to threat." He paused. "Instead," he said, "the most powerful thing about your species appears to be something else entirely." I waited. "You do not teach your children to be afraid," he said. "I have read the files. Every other species we have encountered that produces intelligent offspring teaches them, through some mechanism, to be cautious, to assess threat, to wait before engaging. It is a survival adaptation. It protects them." He looked at my notebook, which was on the seat beside me, nearly full. "You do not do this. You teach your children to be curious, to ask questions, to approach the unfamiliar and try to understand it." He looked at me. "Clara, you were in an unknown facility on an alien space station, and your first instinct was to take notes." "It seemed like the right thing to do," I said. "It is extraordinary," he said. "It is the most extraordinary thing I have encountered in 6 months of studying your species, and I want you to know that it is also, I think, why your parents are here." I looked at him. "They came because they love you," he said, "obviously. That is why they came. But they built those ships and flew them here in 90 minutes because they raised you to believe that the universe is something to run toward, and they believe it too. It is the same instinct. They could not be afraid of what was out here, not enough to stay on the ground, not when you were up here being curious about it." I thought about this for a moment. "My mum always says that the world is bigger than it looks," I said. "Yes," said Vexhari, "I think she is right." The door opened, and Commander Krethos came in, and behind him there were people I recognized, not all of them, but enough. Patricia Hallam was in the front, and my mother was 2 steps behind her, and the moment my mother saw me, she stopped walking for exactly 1 second before covering the rest of the distance very quickly. I let her. I was very glad she was there. But I also finished question 23 first. It seemed important to complete the list. 1 year, 2 months, and 11 days after what the Coalition officially named the Asteroid Club incident, I stood in front of the High Council of the Galactic Coalition and read from a prepared statement. I had written the statement myself. I had also had it reviewed by Dr. Una Sell, who made 4 changes, all of them improvements, and by Commander Krethos, who made 1 change and told me it was my document and I should trust it. I trusted it. I had worked on it for 6 weeks. But I will be honest with you. The thing I was most nervous about, standing at the front of that chamber, was the fact that Clara was in the public gallery. She was sitting in the 2nd row, in a seat she had apparently requested by name, because the council's public liaison told me with some amusement that they had received a very politely worded request from a human child asking for confirmation that the public gallery would be open and that she would be permitted to attend and that she would be allowed to bring a notebook. She had been permitted. She had her notebook. She was writing in it when I looked up at the gallery before beginning, and she saw me look, and she gave a small, composed nod, the same nod she had given me in the monitoring room 14 months ago when I handed her back the list and told her we were ready for questions 14 through 23. I took a breath and began. "Honorable members of the Council," I said, "I am here to present the final incident report for Coalition File 0047, known as the Asteroid Club Incident, and to make recommendations based on the findings of the 14-month review committee, of which I have been a member. I will summarize as clearly as I can. The council chamber was large and designed for formality. 12 seats at the primary arc, a testimony platform in the center, a full record-keeping panel running along the side wall. I had been in this room twice before in my career, once to receive a commendation and once to explain a navigational error that had delayed a supply shipment by 6 days. Neither occasion had felt like this. This occasion felt like history, not in a dramatic way, in the way that sometimes a moment presents itself and you understand, while you are still inside it, that it will be repeated in records and referenced in documents long after the specific people involved have retired or moved on or stopped being the current versions of themselves. I continued. On the night in question, 12 human subadults between the ages of 7 and 12 years were apprehended within the perimeter of Survey Station 4 on EC7 and transferred to Outpost 9's Holding Room C, where they remained for approximately 9 hours before being reunited with their families. The detainment was made by a junior officer acting without consultation with senior staff or the Human Liaison Office. The officer's documented reasoning was that the subadults represented no threat and that processing them during active business hours would be simpler and more orderly. I paused. The officer was correct that the subadults represented no immediate threat. He was incorrect that the situation was simple. The incident triggered a full human community response that involved 47 civilian vessels, including 3 modified atmospheric ground transports, converging on Outpost 9 within 90 minutes of the community becoming aware that children were aboard the station. This is the fastest organized response involving civilian craft ever documented in coalition records. I heard one of the council members make a sound. A small sound. I did not stop. The response was entirely non-violent. The 47 vessels made no threatening approach. The transmission from the fleet, which I have included in full in Appendix C, requested their children calmly and thanked us for our attention. No weapons were activated. No aggressive maneuvers were taken. The fleet held a stable position at 2 kilometers distance and waited while we prepared the children for transfer. I looked up briefly. Clara was writing. "I want to be clear," I said, "about what that response means. A civilian fleet, assembled in under 90 minutes, crossing vacuum, in modified and jury-rigged spacecraft, with no military escort and no weapons, to retrieve their children from an armed coalition outpost. That is not the response of a species that is frightened of us. That is the response of a species for whom love is a logistical fact, for whom the protection of their children is not a heroic exception to daily life, but an assumption so deeply built into their culture and their neurology that it overrides every other concern without effort and without hesitation." I set down the first page of my statement. The 14-month review committee has made 17 recommendations. I will summarize the most significant. I went through the recommendations in order. The first was the revision of the detainment protocols to explicitly prohibit the detainment of human subadults under any circumstances not involving direct evidence of a threat to station safety. This had already been implemented at every coalition outpost in the EC7 region, under the emergency protocol that Commander Krethos had activated the morning after the incident. The second was the expansion of the human behavioral files, specifically the sections concerning children, parental response, and community protective behavior. Dr. Una Sell had led this work personally. The new section on human children was 41 pages, and it included a field observation component that had involved, with full community consent, a year of documented interactions between coalition personnel and human families across 4 communities. The section had been reclassified in the threat database from non-threat subadult to a new category Dr. Sell had proposed and the committee had approved. The category was called Protected Status, Maximum Priority. It meant, in practical terms, that any scenario involving human children was to be escalated immediately and without exception to the highest available authority, and that the escalation note was to include the full text of the parental response behavioral file as a mandatory read. In the margin of the database entry, Dr. Sell had added a single line, which the committee had voted unanimously to keep. It read, "See also, do not do this. Under any circumstances, we cannot be clearer." The third and most substantial recommendation was the creation of a new division within the Coalition's First Contact Bureau, dedicated specifically to the study of species that displayed strong community protective behaviors, with a focus on long-term relationship building rather than standard diplomatic protocols. The division would be staffed by behavioral scientists, cultural liaisons, and field officers with documented experience in human community interactions. I had been asked to lead it. I had said yes before they finished asking. The fourth recommendation, and the one I had been most uncertain about including but had ultimately decided was essential, was a formal apology from the Coalition to the 12 children of the Asteroid Club and their families. Not a diplomatic apology, a personal one, delivered by senior officers directly to each family, in their own homes, in their own language. I had delivered 7 of these apologies myself over the past 14 months. Each one had been different, and each one had been difficult, and each one had been, at the end, something that felt right, in a way that is hard to describe, but that I recognized as important. The response from the families, in every case, had been generous in ways I had not expected and had not felt entitled to. Clara's mother had offered me tea. I had drunk it this time. When I finished the recommendations, the council chair asked if I had anything to add outside the formal record. I did. I had not written this part down because it was not a recommendation. It was something I wanted to say, and I wanted to say it in my own words, without a prepared text. "I have spent 14 months thinking about what we got wrong," I said, "and there are many things. The junior officer's judgment call, the absence of a clear escalation protocol, the gap in our behavioral files, the failure to establish an emergency contact system with the Human Liaison Office. All of those are real failures, and they are being corrected." I paused. "But I have also spent 14 months thinking about what we did not understand about humans before that night. And I think this is more important than the protocol failures, because you can fix a protocol with a revision. You cannot fix a misunderstanding of a species without going back to the beginning and rethinking what you thought you knew." The chamber was quiet. "We studied humans for 20 years before contact," I said. "We watched them, we cataloged them, we analyzed their behaviors and their social structures and their technologies. We noted that they were a young species, highly variable, capable of considerable conflict within their own populations. We categorized them as interesting but not exceptional, a species to be watched carefully and engaged with cautiously. I thought about Clara at the communication panel, about Voth doing the clapping game, about 47 ships, some of them yellow, holding position at 2 kilometers. We missed the thing that matters most about them," I said. "We measured their weapons, and their territories, and their conflicts. We did not measure the thing that built them, the thing that sends 47 civilian ships across vacuum in 90 minutes. The thing that produces 10-year-old children who, upon being detained on an alien space station, spend the first 90 minutes taking notes and preparing a list of questions." I looked up at the gallery. Clara had stopped writing. She was watching me. "Humans are not exceptional because they are strong," I said. "They are not exceptional because they are numerous or technologically advanced or politically unified, because they are not always those things. They are exceptional because they teach their children that the universe is worth understanding, that the correct response to the unknown is curiosity, that the people around you are worth knowing, that love is not a weakness or a vulnerability, but the most practical and powerful organizing principle available to a social species. I thought about question number 1. What are your actual names, not your job titles? When Clara handed me her list of questions that night, I said, the first question was about names. She wanted to know our names, not our ranks, not our functions, our names, because to her, the most important piece of information in a new situation involving other people is who they actually are. I let this sit for a moment. I have been in the coalition for 22 years. I have met representatives of 31 species. I have never been asked that question first, by anyone. The chamber was completely still. The Asteroid Club incident was a mistake, I said. A serious one, with implications that we are still working through, but it also taught us something that no amount of external observation from a safe distance would have taught us. It taught us who humans are, when you stop watching them from far away and actually meet them. I gathered my pages. We should have done that earlier. We should have been less afraid of what we might find. I stepped back from the testimony platform. The council chair said, "Thank you, Coordinator Vexhari." I nodded and returned to my seat. Afterward, in the outer corridor, I found Commander Krethos waiting. He was standing by the wide observation window that looked out over the station's primary docking ring, and he was watching a small vessel complete its approach, a standard shuttle from EC7, on its regular schedule. "Good testimony," he said. "Thank you, sir. You left out the part where Brel had to be talked out of requesting a transfer. That seemed like an internal matter." He made a sound that was close to a laugh. "Fair." We stood together for a moment, looking at the shuttle. "Voth is teaching the hand game at the Cultural Exchange Program next month," Krethos said. "I heard. He has been practicing for 6 weeks. He told me. He says he still struggles with the left-hand rhythm." "He does," said Krethos, "but he has improved considerably." He paused. "That is the thing about humans, I think. The ones who spend time with them improve considerably." I looked out at the shuttle. A year ago, the sight of a human vessel approaching the station would have sent officers to their positions out of pure trained reflex. Now it generated, at most, a logged arrival note and a liaison alert. Progress was, by its nature, quiet. "She is still out there," Krethos said. I looked at him. "Clara," he said, "in the corridor. She has been waiting. She has the notebook." I almost laughed. I did not, quite. She said she wanted to ask follow-up questions to the testimony. Of course she did. "She submitted the request through the official council inquiry channel," I said, 14 months ago. She has been on the waiting list since then." Krethos turned to look at me. "She submitted an inquiry request to the High Council. She was 10 years old," I said. "She did not see why that should be an obstacle." He considered this. "They are going to change everything," he said. "Not as a warning, as a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who has had 14 months to arrive at a conclusion and is now entirely at peace with it. Not because they set out to, but because that is what happens when you put a species that curious into contact with a galaxy that is full of things worth knowing." I thought about this, about Clara filling her second notebook, about Owen, who had spent a week on our station last spring as part of the new exchange program and who had taken apart and correctly reassembled 4 pieces of station equipment that our own engineering team had not been able to diagnose, about Lily, 7 years old, sending monthly audio messages to Voth, teaching him the words for colors in a second human language she was currently learning. About the moment I had walked into holding room C and said I owed them an apology, and Clara had looked at me with those calm, serious eyes and said yes, I did, but she still had questions 14 through 23. "Sir," I said, "I am going to go speak with her." Yes, said Krethos, you should. I walked down the corridor. Clara was indeed there, in a chair outside the testimony chamber, notebook open on her knee, writing with the focused attention of someone who has a lot to get down and is not wasting any time. She was 11 now, almost 12. She had the same reddish hair, the same composed expression, the same quality of paying attention to everything without appearing to rush. She looked up when she heard me coming. Good testimony, she said. Thank you. You left out some things. Which things? She looked at her notebook. The part about Voth, and the clapping game. I think people should know about that part. Why? She thought about it for a moment. Because that was the part that actually mattered, she said. Not the protocols or the files or the apologies. Voth learned the clapping game. He was not good at it, and it did not help anything practical, and he did not have to do it. He just did it because Lily showed him, and it seemed worth learning. She looked up. That is how things get better. Not with committees, with people deciding that other people are worth knowing. I sat down in the chair across from her. You should put that in the revised files, I said. I already sent Dr. Sell a note, she said. She wrote back. She said she agreed. Of course she had. Do you have your questions? I asked. She looked at her notebook. 14 of them. From the testimony? 9 from the testimony. 5 carryovers from last time. All right, I said. She flipped to the right page and settled the notebook on her knee, exactly as she had sat with it in holding room C 14 months ago, in the holding room that had since been officially decommissioned and converted into a cultural exchange lounge, because no one on the station had been willing to use it as a holding room anymore. The first question was, you said humans teach their children that the universe is worth understanding. Do other species not do that? And if not, why not? And what do they teach their children instead? It was a good question. It was going to take a while to answer properly. I settled in. Outside the observation window at the end of the corridor, the EC-7 shuttle had completed its docking. The small light above the bay door turned green. Somewhere down in the cultural exchange lounge, Voth was probably practicing the clapping game. And here in the corridor, I told Clara what I knew, and she wrote it down, and the notebook that had started full of questions that night in the holding room was nearly full now. Nearly 2 notebooks of answers and new questions and things worth knowing. When she filled this one, she would start a third. I had no doubt about that at all.